Welcome to I Am Radio number 24. Today I will be talking about fear, and it's likely not something you're working with directly. You're likely working with your, maybe you call it anxiety or worry, or you might call it overwhelm, or you might call it what are they doing? But underneath all of that is this experience of fear, and I'm going to talk about it. Hello. I'm going to talk about it from this standpoint, the fear. And underneath, so I write these backwards, which means sometimes the letters go crazy ways. And these ones I got all right, but when we're talking about fear as it pertains to me, your idea of self, you have fear around your physical body, and then you also have fear around your mind. And you can see I didn't put soul here because that would be something you'd still experience if we're talking about an idea relative to the self in your mind. So exploring this topic is important because it gives you a lot of freedom. And when I'm talking about freedom, I'm talking about essentially the ability to not have feelings you don't want to have, and also to feel comfortable or empowered to follow your own inclinations and to speak to your truth and to do what's essentially right for you. And if you would have told me several years ago that my primary underlying issue was fear, I would have told you probably to go screw yourself, and that it was this person or that experience or this thing inside of me as a result of those, but underneath all of it is really, it's fear. And some of that fear is from our own personal experience. If you've had something traumatic or something close to you and you've experienced pain, you're likely afraid to feel it in the future. So you would be afraid relative to what you've seen is possible in life. You may also be afraid based on the experiences that your family has had. And so if you saw my I Am Radio on, if you saw my I Am Radio on healing trauma patterns, I talk a lot about how it's not what was that's your issue, it's what is now. Meaning it's what you have carried forward from what was behind you. And that's true as well for what we collect from the adults around us. So when an adult is caregiving for a child, and I guess it doesn't have to be an adult, but the reality that the adult creates, is informed by their own fear, which means if you think that something is important or dangerous, you act that way and you pass on that reality to the child. So there is likely a genetic component as well, but it can also be in just what the parent or what the caregiver deems as important, or how they're showing up for themselves, that influences or informs the child's reality, which then they carry forward and keep passing on. And if you've heard about intergenerational trauma, it's that. And again, you can explore that topic from a biological level, or from, like I'm saying, at the mind level. Language is another thing, and that's something I'm practicing talking about more directly, because there is so much freedom to be found when you understand the prison that is language, and instead of using it as a prison, you use it as a prism. And language is a prison when you measure, or you think about yourself or your what's available to you concretely using words. So if I think that I should be some type of way, I've got this word that I think I should be, until I actually unpack or open up what that word is, it owns me. So unless you own your words, they own you. And that means, for example, the concept or the word of success. it can own you, which means make you miserable until you think you're that, unless you really explore what is that personally to me, what does that mean, until you kind of take the word, and the words that are available mainstream are the ones that hold the most power. So relationship, love, professional success, beauty, these words, until you unpack them and develop your own personal relationship with them, they can make you pretty miserable. And that all flows back. Got lots of hand movements today. I am in the market for puppets because I want to do this with puppets. If you know any good puppet sites, let me know. As that pertains to our topic today, which is fear relative to the self, that would be measuring yourself against words would be a kind of mind fear. And I also think of that as psyche fear, like image of the self fear. Am I good enough? Are people going to like me? Am I doing it right? Did I live my life right? It's kind of like there's nothing threatening in this area, but you perceive a threat through the ways that you're thinking about yourself. Let's admit the act of having a child has a special kind of selfishness in it, regardless of fear. Maybe it could. I think so. That's actually a really great point, and that's a piece of information that you have. So when we're looking at fear relative to the self, and again, this is barring any, sharp objects or tigers in your immediate area, the uncomfortable experiences we have mostly now at a mental and emotional level are in response to information. So what's so cool about that is then if you change how you interact with the information, you change your personal experience. And so what you're talking about as far as people, having kids out of selfish interests, that could be true for some people, but there are so many different experiences and iterations on the human experience that's really tough to say. It's impossible. So with the work that I've done over the years with people, I've gotten, to see inside of lives and minds and heads, and I use a tool I talk about all the time called Human Design and Gene Keys, and it alerts you to experiential differences that you wouldn't notice because you don't see it as an option within yourself. For example, I have access to a lot of energy and very driven. It's not like I have a switch that's the same as you that I flip on and you don't. It might be that your switches are different. So when we're looking at motivations of others, generally we're thinking that they're looking at the same information that we are and they're making a different choice. But what information shows up to them and how they are inspired to work with it is very unique. So as it comes to fear of self, that's actually that makes us really afraid, because that means we can't anticipate other people, we can't understand them, and they can't understand us. And so it's very uncomfortable at a mind level to accept that while we're sharing physical space, we're ultimately living in very unique renditions of it. So there's a book, The Mastery of Love, and I shared it with someone who is a critical thinker and critical reader, and they're like, this is bullshit, this is a bunch of stories. I'm like, yeah, it could be. And for him, the way that he felt safe was having things laid out through logic, but there's also a lot of wisdom in it. And I think I think it's Miguel Ruiz. He does a good job of kind of illustrating through story or anecdote how we're not really having the same experience. We have the illusion of having the same experience because we're in the same room hearing and seeing the same things. But what we perceive while we hear, while we see, while we interact with what we've perceived and heard is very unique. And it's almost like we're all watching different television shows and we talk about it like it's the same one. So when it comes back to the me fear, it's almost easier to kind of like overlook that so that you feel safe. That's actually comfortable in my point of view most of the time. Yeah, that's great. And that the more, what's ironic about most of the work of self-mastery is when you give up control or you give up understanding in the name of control, you actually feel better. And an example of that is, let's say that somebody has an attachment to a particular person and they think that, I need to be in this relationship with this person or else, or my life's not right, or my life's not good. They perceive or think that love comes from that person. And because they're so afraid of not having that source, they don't actually show love to them. It's more distorted through fear, and that might be like not being completely honest for fear that they would be judged and the person would leave, or being, controlling in that they're emotionally upset when the other person does something that's, without them. So here is love distorted through fear, and it seems like that's how we're supposed to love. Hold on tight or you don't care, when really the experience of love is much different when it's open-handed. So allowing the possibility that this person is sharing love with you right now, but will they forever? You don't know, and you don't really need to know because they're not your source of love. And having that, relationship too, again, it's information, can change how you perceive or respond to what's present. And the fear there would be, it might be a hybrid of body and mind. The mind might perceive it to be a threat, that the person won't love them, meaning that they would then decide that means that they're not good enough, or that they'll be alone, or that other people might judge them for the relationship ending. There might be a body concern or fear, and that where will I live? How will I do it? Etc. And all of that clouds the person's ability to respond thoughtfully to what's there and actually act in love. They would be acting in fear. Just try to imagine that someone reads your thoughts. They're mine respectively. Hurtful sometimes. Well, I think with transparency, that would be something again in fear. And what I'm seeing right now is a lot of opportunity to change how people share information. And before, it's wild, really. The more you get, the further you get away from things, but up close, it seems like, if I upset them this terrible, they're going to be mad. And then, we usually stop there. But if you consider what's actually lost when you're not transparent about the information that you have, it's generally the thing that you're trying to do. So if that's at a personal level, if you're in a relationship with someone, wouldn't the point be some level of intimacy or connection? And if you're not honest with them, are you really serving the point of the relationship? In a professional setting, if you're not open about the constraints of the system or what you see from where you're sitting, is that really serving the project best? So we are conditioned out of fear, what will happen to me. And some of that is, like I said, can be bodily, and that, at different times in history, people were punished physically for, speaking honestly. And that can cloud, like when you're sitting in a boardroom and it's your turn to say what you really think and feel, you're not responding to the boardroom. You might be responding to an irrational grandparent who beat the shit out of you. You're not, it's very crazy when you start to see what's happening now, and am I acting out of now, or am I acting with ghosts or phantoms? So with, transparency, that's kind of my big push, and I definitely had a lot of room there myself to grow, because you don't necessarily recognize that transparency is a choice until you see that it is, and you also see why you would want to. So going back to the idea that a lot of the stuff that happens in self-mastery is ironic is you think that it's not safe to be honest about how you think and feel, but it's the opposite that's true. By hiding what you think and feel, you diminish your personal experience, likely what you're trying to do, and also the experience of the people that you care about. If you really love someone, you give them the information that's appropriate, that's present, that's real, for them to make a choice about what's right for them. It's not up to you to manage how they feel or what they think. And a lot of our film and television, our film and TV, that's kind of like how it's presented, where we're sort of shown, don't really tell them or create this front or do these things when it doesn't actually serve the point. And again, there is a body component of it, so it's not just mind, it's not just learned, where it's, fear of survival can be triggered when it comes to communication. But again, what's really wild, what we're looking at in communication is just the transfer of information. So under this, I don't know and feel, when you have a lot, I guess this would depend where you are in your mindfulness practice. And mindfulness to me is being hip to the things that you hear in your head. It's knowing that there are things up here that are happening rather than just running along with them. So mindfulness to me is having at least the inclination that when you start to think something, that your thoughts might not be real. And that can be very scary as well, because this is the voice that you count on to tell you what is, so you can make choices, or so you think. The voice in your head likely sounds like you, but it is a combination of all the people you've ever heard, anything that really stood out to you, probably some news broadcasters. Like, it's your voice, but it's not your voice. You're what's listening to it. And that can be really trippy. When I illustrate that for clients, I'll usually use a table, and I'll have a bunch of voices around the table. There'll be the scared child, the ambitious dreamer, the parent. All these people sit around the boardroom, around the table, and it seems like the one of you, like the voice of yours that organizes the voices, is yours. The voice that's talking to the voices and taking in information and, kind of digesting it. But you're the voice, you're what's listening. And I think when we come back to this fear, we want that voice to be real. We want to trust that voice because, again, that's how we think we navigate the world around us. But often the voice isn't really helpful. It's hurtful. The voice can only talk about things that it has words for, that it knows to look at in ways that it's been trained to process information. And usually it's towards an aim that is also like conditioned or not learned. So that would look like if somebody grew up in a very negative environment that was critical, it was common for people to be critical of each other. The person learns to process information critically, and that's information about others, but also information about the self. And it seems like the information that voice is pointing out to you is what you need to work with. Is, oh, they're doing this. Oh, you're not enough that. So you have this thought that voice has generated, and yet you wouldn't have that thought to work with except for that you learned to process life from that critical perspective. So to me, mindfulness is starting to grow in awareness, or be open to grow in awareness, that those inner conversations aren't what they seem. And it doesn't mean that you don't think, and it doesn't mean that you don't, explore information mentally. It just means that you have a relationship with it that helps you serve whatever your main point is. Usually when we're thinking, what we're trying to do in some way, shape, or form is avoid feeling something that hurts. And ironically, when we're doing that, it hurts. And you have a physiological response to those painful things. And your brain doesn't know if it's a real threat or an unreal threat. If I see something crawl across the floor and I think it's a snake, my body will be like, holy shit, it's a snake. But I only perceived it as that. Maybe the wind blew a sock and it's not a real threat, but I perceived a threat. And so my body responded as if it was threat. And when you have a narrator inside that's like, danger, danger, you're not good enough, this is happening all day long, your body's like, we're going down, we're not going to make it, shut down the higher level functioning, no repair. Like it's not a healthy hormonal environment. It's not good at all. And so mindfulness to me is taking, and let's say that's you, rather than be critical of yourself about that, let it be okay. When you notice that you're freaking yourself out about stuff that probably you don't need to freak out about, be nice to you about it. Say something cute like, oh, look, there you go, you're wearing your scaredy pants or something, and start to diffuse the system, the experience with love, rather than come at it with more fear or more criticism. Oh, you know better than to think about that, you're gonna hurt yourself. No, that doesn't help. Again, what's the main point? Well, the main point is that you feel relaxed and you're able to take in that at this point in time, you're pretty safe. And that can be like that idea of the point in time where you're fine, safe. It can be interesting to explore, because you might say, yeah, well, in 4 days, if I don't pay my rent, I'm not going to be that safe. So, head wag, yes, and that you can create, again, that mental emotional environment of fear, but it really doesn't do anything. Fear takes you out of higher level thinking and creative thinking and collaboration and puts you in a very disempowered place mentally. It's really hard to think at a higher level if your body's afraid it's going to be like, something's going to happen to it. So soothing, from my vantage point, is the number one tool, self-soothing, to start to correct some of the inner dialogue that isn't supportive of what you're actually trying to do, which is likely your best. You're probably trying to do your best. And the voices inside that are like, do this more, you didn't do that enough. Like, that you embrace those voices rather than push against them. Let's discuss, please, mindful to what kind of extent? I'm not sure I know what you're asking me. Can you rephrase it, please? Mindful to what kind of extent? Sorry. I don't think I understand. So I'm going to wrap up shortly because I noticed I like to keep these under a half hour. What I started to talk about today was fear. I have a paper I've been working on it, and what I'm suggesting is that it's underneath all the other problems you think you have. And it's almost like fear comes through the system, and however you've been trained to interpret life is what you affix it to. And so you might feel fear, and I guess that would be one, if you feel first and then think. We had been talking earlier about thinking first and then feeling fear. So if you have a thought that creates a scenario where you are somehow, somewhere concerned that you might not be good enough, or you might not be loved, or you might not be able to survive, then you feel fear, and then the fear translates to generally action that doesn't make a lot of sense, and a mental emotional environment that's not supportive of what you're trying to do. And then I talked about, well, if you feel fear first and then your mind interprets it. Very rarely are we aware of why we actually feel what we feel. There are so many influences externally that are constantly playing your feels piano. Particularly now, the environment is very stressful. Like, you can kind of feel it in the air. I live in an urban area, at least I can. I feel agitation and have the awareness to know it's not mine. And that means that it's kind of like if your neighbor has on really loud music and you hear it in your house, having the awareness to like not look for the knob. It's not yours. It's coming in through the walls. So sometimes we feel things that aren't ours or are in response to something that's not, like let's say that you had a traumatizing event and then you walked past an advertisement on a bus side that showed something similar in color that threw you back. Unless you're hyper aware, you likely didn't notice that triggered something in your brain to be like, alert, alert. And then you feel upset and then you're like, this is probably what my partner's doing. That bitch never, mindfulness to me is being hip to the idea that what's happening up here again is not really what it seems. How much being mindful is positive? I try not. So with mindfulness and positivity, I find that you don't need to make yourself positive. As long as you aren't making yourself miserable, you're generally pretty good. And when you are actively trying to make yourself positive, then you are still coming from a place of fear. You're saying, I'm not okay as I am, so I need to do something. And that's a hamster wheel. So you'll never, the way to stop the hamster wheel is to be okay as you are. In whatever state you are in, embrace it and say, I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm scared. You say okay to the state rather than try to avoid it or escape it. And that's how the wheel stops. Do you support the use of NLP in your practice? I have studied a bit of NLP, not with a practitioner, but I read a lot of books and I found a lot of value in it personally and with my clients. I had talked a little bit last night on my story and also on my other channel about the limits of language and logic. And that's essentially NLP where the mind creates a map of the territory and we experience suffering when we confuse the map for the territory. So that's basically saying like, I can't go this way, there's no road there. But it's not because there isn't a road there, it's because the map doesn't include the road. And the work that I do with clients really is like, okay, well, let's just clean your map up, because that's really where people get stuck. Let's play once for you, please. Sure. Yeah, sure, go for it. Okay, so I want to wrap this up so it doesn't get too long. Does anybody have any thoughts or feelings? So this is my favorite topic. Strangely, I never thought I would say that because this really is what's under everything. And so what I found at the pinnacle of fear is this idea of being separate from life. And I have a quote from Richard Rudd, who is the Gene Keys guy, who I really like his work. And he says freedom is really something around like you don't think that you're separate from life. And when you think you're separate from life, that means that you're afraid of what might happen because you think it will take away from you. Where, from what I found, the things that you bump into in life that hurt actually ultimately add to your personal experience and reveal more of who you truly are. And so we have all this fear about what we might encounter, and yet the stuff that we encounter is generally good for us as long as we're willing to embrace it and work with it. So freedom, real freedom is being free of the idea that you're separate from life, something like that. So fear kind of like sits, separate from life to me means we exist, as far as I can tell, in this complete system. Humanity, books, trees, tires, like everything is all this one body, similar to how I have this body. And just like I have this one body, and within my body there are individual organs, and within the organs there are individual cells. And it seems like, oh, look, here's a cell. That's not the body, but the cell is an expression of the body, and the body is an expression of the cell. And so there's collectively this organism of life. And to me, being separate from life is the idea that you aren't a part of the body of it, and you can't not be. So we exist in this body of life, and a lot of our fear comes from the idea that we're separate from it. And it comes back to this idea of me, where you think that in some ways you're more important than other pieces of the body. And, I don't want to die. well, sorry, like, we're all dying. It's part of being this, and you get recycled back into the body, and so the body itself continues. And if you identify as the body, as part of this body, expression of the body, you never die. And yet your current experience would like cease to be in some ways, but that we'd have to get into some conversations on time and other things that I'm not completely sold on. So separate from life, to me, it seems like the body of life is, its objective or intention is to further the body of life. And if you're pushing against life, it'll push against you. It's trying, not push against, that's not the best way I could say it. It's like, it seems like a healthy cell is good for the body, and the body then therefore would want the individual cells to be healthy. So how can you allow for that to be possible in a way that whatever is brought to you via life, you accept as if it was good for the body, good for the cell? And it depends where you are in your journey to take in some information like that, but that really is what ultimately like healed me, in that I let life be right, and I started to work with life as if it was purifying my individual cell, and it did then. And when you look at the not that, so even if that theory didn't hold, if you look at the not that, so if you act as if life is not for you, what do you get? What do you gain? And there's nothing. You don't. You feel stress. You gain more by acting as if, even if it wasn't true, that life was for you, than you lose by acting as if it's not. And I think that's essentially Pascal's wager when they talk about the presence of God. And when I talk about God, I mean the body. I mean this, the organism through which all else is. So when I'm saying like God is with me, God is for me, that's basically the infinite intelligence. The body wants to proliferate life. And if you surrender the idea of me, that you're separate from life, then you get to like tap into all of that, because life wants, it's kind of like how the earth heals itself. As long as you're not over there still screwing it up, or the body generally heals itself if you're not over there, you keep touching it and screwing it up. From what I've found, the mind plays the role of the hand that keeps like touching it and screwing it up, where if the mind doesn't touch it, life will heal it. And again, when you first, or at least when I did first heard something like that, I'd be like, okay. I had my me story, how I valued myself, why I thought I was important, was because I was a warrior and a survivor and a fighter. And so any threat to my reality in which I would no longer be that, I pushed aside, because I needed that to feel important, or to feel good enough to be alive, essentially. I need to be this, so I'm different than other people, so that I'm important. And when I started to surrender that, everything got a lot easier. Maintain this type of self-inquiry. I respect your courage. Thank you. I think it's similar to what I was saying. When you actually look at the not that versus that, it's more comfortable for me to be uncomfortable in this inquiry than trying to act like I don't know that's where I need to be. So it's a choice-ish, but not so much. And I highly recommend, like I looked for remedies for suffering and everything, but they were always here. And it really is how to, like that, the pinnacle, the top of the pinnacle, do you think that you're separate from life? And if you can heal that idea, then all of the fear downstream from it is a lot easier to clean up, because you've already connected to it's going to be okay. All right, I'm going to close it here unless there's anything else for anybody. Thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate it. Just trying to do a midday one. And my goal for I Am Radio had been 24 broadcasts. We hit it with this one, actually with the last one, but I called it a half. I think what I'm going to do next is look at remixing them, meaning I'm going to go back through the topics and try to do them like faster and tighter. If there are any topics that you would like to be covered, please let me know. If there's anything that I talked to that was clear or unclear, helpful or not helpful, I'm interested in that feedback as well. My point in doing this is because it's fun for me, and like, this is what I got to say. It's natural, and also maybe it helps, if the work or whatever I've done is something, it's a fruit that I grew that somebody else is hungry for, beautiful, so just showing up to share what I've got in case anybody wants it. Thank you so much for coming. A pleasure to see everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon or evening or day wherever you are.